What introduced the concept of creation of class and object in Python and using variables in the init method of Python. Now let's look at another type of variable in Python or oops of Python where you can create a variable which is common to all the objects. Now in the previous examples, whatever variables that were created were object specific. So for example, let me look at a previous example now. Let's say this is the one of the bigger examples that we took. So here every account that we created had a different value for name, a different value for balance. So account one had a different value, account two a different value. So these variables are called as data variables or member variables, which have values specific to the object. So ACC1 is one object that will have a different value for name as compared to ACC2, which is a different object that have a different value for name. And modifying the name of ACC1 will not affect the name of ACC2 in any way, right? So this is the normal da- member variables or data variables which are present inside the init. So any variable defined inside init with the self are called as data variables or member variables. Now it is possible to create variables which are shared by all the objects. That is, that variable will be same for account object 1, object 2, all of them will have the same value. These are called as class variables. Let's see, let's take an example now. So I have created a class called as test. Now I have declared a variable outside init. So this is my init function or the constructor. Outside this, I have a variable called as class attributes is equal to some value 1, 2, 3. This can be anything. It can have a string or any other value is allowed. So this is my variable, and inside it, I have one more variable called as data attribute. So this is a normal variable which is similar to what we have used in the past. Now, difference between this variable and this variable is that the variable inside init is object specific. So every object will have or can have a different value of this variable data attribute, but the variable outside the init are called as class variables. These are shared by all the objects, so every object of the type test will have the same value for this variable. So in this example, for example, I have created two objects, object 1, object 2, both are of the type test. Okay, now this object 2 has a variable called as data variable, has a variable called as class attribute. Object 1 has a variable called as data attribute and class attribute. So the data attribute variable value is can be different for object 1 and object 2. There is no relation between the two variables. But the class attribute variable is going to be common for both of them. So, for example, now if I want to print this value, now because this value is common for the class, you can access this using the class name also. So the class attribute can be accessed by the class name. So I can say test dot the variable name. So test is the class name, not the object name. Now because this variable is common for all the objects, I can access it using the uh, prefix of class itself. Or you can also access it using object prefix, object 1 dot class attribute, object 2 dot class attribute. So for all these three cases, the variable which is printed is this variable and its value is 1, 2, 3, right? On the other hand, if you want to access this data attribute, so here I can't access the data attribute using the class name because this value will be different for different objects. So I can say object 1 dot data attribute, object 2 dot data attribute. So the data attribute value for object 1 will be printed and data attribute value for object 2 will be printed. So in this case, we are assigning the same value 12, 12, but practically you can have something else also. Right? So now if we change the value, now if I change the value of this data attribute in the program, so it will change only for the object for which I do the modification. So if I say object 1 dot data attribute is equal to 100, okay, but that does not change the data attribute of object 2. That will remain the same, right? So that means if I do this, and now if I print the data attributes of object 1 and object 2, only objects 1's data attribute would have got updated. Object 2's data attribute would remain at 12 itself, right? So we can test that. Let us run the code till here and see what happens. Let me uh, debug it. Easy to see the output. So I'm printing the class attributes now. So you can see on the right hand side, class attributes are being printed. So through if I access through class name, I get a value 1, 2, 3. I can access it using through the object, which is object 1 here. I get 1, 2, 3. I can access it using another object. I still get the value 1, 2, 3. So either through class name or through object names, you can access the class attribute. Now, if you access the data attribute, so I have changed the data attribute here to 100. So let's print and see. So it has printed this line, data attribute. So you can see object 1's data attribute value is 100 and object 2's data attribute value is 12. So even if you updated one data attribute, only one got updated, other remained at 12. Alright, so these values are specific to the object. Now we can modify the class attribute. So here I have changed the class attribute by accessing it through the class prefix, but this can be done using prefix of object also. So test.class attribute is equal to 456, and I've again tried to print the value of class attribute, accessing it from class name from object names, right? So if I print it modified class attributes through class name, I get 456, which is the value we assigned here. Through one object we get 456. So other object also we get 456, right? So whatever update happened here was updated for both object 1 and object 2, right? This is not possible in data attributes. Data attributes are specific to the object only and are not shared by the objects of the same class, right? So generally we use the class attributes when we want to have some value which is going to be common for all the objects that are created, so that we don't have to repeatedly create the variable over and over again. As an example, for here in if I take the account class itself, I can have the bank name as the class attribute. Let's say I say bank name is equal to SBI, for example. That means all accounts that get created, they will have different account name, account balance, but they will all have the same bank name as SBI, which generally makes sense because one account generally falls under single bank. The account numbers change, but the bank name does not change. So I can create data class attributes for such purposes, where you are going to have some value or some variable which whose value is common to all the variables uh, present in being used by the program. Okay, so hope the concept is clear. Uh, Thank you.